Borderline personality disorder is one of the most misunderstood and misdiagnosed, as well as demonized mental health conditions ever created. First of all, putting it into the same category with psychopaths, putting it into the same category as antisocial personality disorder, and putting it into the same category as narcissistic personality disorder, and even having it be a comorbid diagnosis with any number of these other cluster B disorders is one of the most egregious mistakes of modern psychological history. I'll explain to you that there is a big difference between some of these observationally accurate behaviors and the underlying dynamics. And if you happen to have this disorder, you can feel free to chime in. But you see, the one thing that you see with BPD is high levels of idealization, high levels of splitting, high levels of abandonment anxiety. That is very much identical to what you see in normal people pleasers, except for one thing, the splitting. Now, people pleasers at the end of a narcissistic abuse cycle can look very much like people with CPTSD because they all have been devalued to a point of near total numbness, confusion, and they will have stockpiled so much unexpressed and unexperienced emotions because they've been totally negated and suppressed. And so they will become very reactive and they will be engaging in reactive abuse behaviors simply because that is the bread and butter of covert narcissists. The difference is that the borderline personality type is the same personality structure as a people pleaser, except it comes from an environment with high levels of sadism. And so while a people pleaser will form by having a narcissistic mother or father or both, the borderline is likely to be somebody who had a psychopath and or malignant narcissist father or mother, somebody that was sadistic, somebody that was almost impossible to please, somebody that projected and entitled themselves to be highly abusive and highly punishing. This causes the mandated extreme levels of idealization and fantasies about a perfected future to the point where a little girl can turn their drug dealing, Hell's Angel, abusive, homicidal dad into a perfect father and want to be daddy's little girl. You see, children are helpless. Children do not have any power or control over big, scary parents, and idealizing themselves to cater to the devaluation and the judgment and the perfectionism of narc parents is something that develops this disorder over a period of time. The unexpressed emotions accumulate in the borderline in the same way you see with people pleasers later in life, except it accumulates all the way to the maximum. And so splitting is literally when the cup of your emotions is so full already that you're reactive, that you're very sensitive to any perceived slights, abandonments, or tomfoolery. And so in the narcissist, in the dynamic with the borderline personality in a relationship that's romantic, there will be a high level of idealization that the borderline person very much likes the approach of the narcissist, the high levels of validation that the narcissist lavishes, really works to satiate the abandonment anxiety, that the predatory or pursuit of a male, for example, to the female, where you have a male narcissist, that a lot of these women, they actually believe that it protects them when someone's really interested. And so when you hear people online talking about, all this upfront effort that they require, that is literally a love bombing competition. Because if you think that a stranger needs to arbitrarily care about you, roll out the red carpet, doesn't even know you, want, you see the sexual desire of narcissistic men becomes something of a fixation of the female because that provides the glue to the relationship. And so they naturally develop themselves to be very attractive. And you can see it, hypersexualized, because that is the one aspect of the psychology of narcissistic men that drives them, that they're very driven to fix themselves emotionally through pleasure. And the conquest of women adds validation, especially if they're attractive women. And so now you see women competing to be attractive in this highly narcissistic driven culture. But you see, the splitting of a borderline may appear on the surface similar to a narcissistic injury or a psychopathic rage. See, the difference is a narcissistic injury is blind, it's rage, it's putting holes in the wall, it does not have any objectivity. But you see, the splitting is actually objective. See, what happens is when the narcissist, it'll breach, and suddenly all this rage and all the internalized trauma of entire childhood just surfaces like a volcano. Now, the borderline person fearing abandonment will also have guilt that will contain this emotion. And so these outbursts of splitting can be shorter duration. See, narcissistic injuries require the ongoing subjective reality to be morphed into a justification pattern, often a slippery slope where many narcissists can end up being stalkers or so destructive because of their inability to assume any accountability and responsibility, whereas splitting will often cause the person to really dramatically need to fix themselves, fix the relationship, and avoid abandonment. And so the splitting in borderline is not a fight or flight based paradigm, but it's the collapse of subjective reality, the same that people might feel in heartbreak. And so people who feel heartbroken, heartbreak is caused by the destruction of a subjective future, a future fantasy that you created where you idealized people. And so people in relationships idealize people to borrow that idealized future to engender happiness and hope for that future today in this effort to fix and change themselves. And so that hypervigilance and trying to figure out how to be good enough for other people is part of this future fantasy, overarching, lifelong fight or flight paradigm of becoming good enough someday. But you see, in borderline, they've already accumulated all that energy that it would take a people pleaser years to develop. And so a people pleaser will slowly be devalued, whereas somebody with borderline will be way more reactive. And that's why borderlines and narcissists have a different dynamic, where oftentimes borderline people, depending on the level of rage, you see, if they were subjected to severe physical trauma or other types where they have a lot of anger from being victimized, well, that can often crush a narcissist, where those subjective reality breaches that we call splitting will then have them shame or have them literally give this feedback to the narcissist in the moment where the narcissist cannot deny or use Darvo. And so that can cause a narcissistic injury or collapse that will have the narcissist begging to come back, but also provides a lot of reactive abuse supply. And so narcissists get so much supply from the borderline because of the love bombing and the idealization and the intense avoidance of abandonment and also the sexual chemistry. And so all that narcissistic supply in the form of the love bombing plus the reaction of splitting often becomes a high level of attachment even for the narcissist. And so you see that many people with BPD can end up discarding a narcissist and causing such a severe collapse or mortification that narcissist's life can fall apart even. And they may come crawling back, but make no mistake, if the borderline takes that narcissist back, well, sometimes that narcissist just wants to then reverse the roles because they want to come back just to be able to fix their false ego. So you see, the subjective splitting is not in any way, shape, or form related to the fight or flight mechanism that is brought in psychopaths and narcissists. And so the outward expression of aggression and anger that you see in splitting may look like a psychopath or a narcissistic injury, but it's not. Narcissists form in very early childhood before they can speak, and they have pervasive anxiety and no empathy, where borderline people have empathy, psychopaths do not. And so borderlines are not in any way, shape, or form related to narcissists from a mental health standpoint, but covert narcissists are often misdiagnosed as borderline. And so many people that say they're BPD are in fact covert narcissists. And so BPD has been dramatically misunderstood, and those people have a high ability to completely heal, totally heal, totally heal. And I have people that can attest to that. 20-minute conversation, letting go of triggers, totally arrests the symptoms of BPD.